Very good. This is the story that I've written about my fighter player character. It's the first of an incident, or in a series of incidents that kind of set him on his path. It's called Digging Up Destiny. Put on some clothes, you're summoned. The gruff voice shook Norgarth awake. His mouth felt like it was stuffed with fur. He reached out for the flagon beside his bed without opening his eyes. His first grab almost knocked it to the floor. The ale was warm and flat, but it was enough to allow him to swallow, and Norgarth had drunk far worse, regularly. Resetting the flagon on the side with a wobble, he slumped back onto the pile of winter wool furs that made his bed. Now! A grunt was all the dwarf could manage in response, where he wanted to tell his rouser to fuck off. Norgarth had difficulty rising, more than usual anyway. How bad was last night? Exerting his drunken body more than he would have wanted to, he pushed himself to his knees, and the unconscious wench laid across his back slid off onto the bed, explaining his difficulty. She fell like a dead weight, but the slow heaving of her bare chest indicated that she was not dead, not that Norgarth cared either way. She was so pissed the fall hadn't woken her. He reached down and took her breast into his hand and gave it a rough squeeze. Clearly last night was a good night. Pinching the red-headed dwarven lady's nipple between his thumb and index finger more forcefully than he had intended, she slapped his hand away with a moan, rolled over and farted. Norgarth bellowed with laughter, which echoed around the chamber, which was filled with streaming midday sun. He swung his legs off the bed and kicked someone in the face. Standing up, he took all his strength, and swaying heavily, he looked down to see a second naked female on the floor. Come back to bed, you short-assed prick, she grumbled in Dwarvish, and rolled over. Yeah, a very good night. The throne room was unusually quiet as Norgarth headed into the arrowhead-shaped audience chamber. His boots clipped the floor with each step the grizzled and muscular dwarf took, sending a spattering of echoed applause bouncing off the intricately carved stone hall. Frescoes of ancient battles adorned the walls, each of which told a separate tale of his clan's rise to power in the region. On the dais at the top of the arrowhead, muttering in whispers to each other, was a small group of advisors and lords either side of the glistening obsidian throne where the king was sat. The king sat in silence, ignoring his counsel. His chin rested atop his fist over the arm of his throne, his brow furrowed and his eyes fixed on Norgarth. He was a toughened, silvered dwarf, but still in the prime of his life. His white hair, which tumbled beyond his shoulder in long, gentle waves, in no way reflected his vitality and strength. He was born with silver hair, an unusual trait in dwarfs, and one that many suggested was a sign that the gods had chosen him for regency. Norgarth, with his jet black hair secured in a rough braid tumbling down his back, could think of nothing worse. The inebriated warrior did not head down towards his sovereign, but over to a table of fruit, bread, cheese, and ale. As he approached, Zartoth, a giant of a dwarf and one of the royal guard, stepped in front of him, arms folded across his crimson scale mail chest. Seat of the king be damned. If this fool thought he could impose himself between Norgarth and anything, then he would be taught what a mistake he'd made. The new arrival balled his hands into powerful fists, about to begin his lesson, when a two-fingered dismissal from the throne caused the guard to step aside. The first cup he filled was drained instantly before it was refilled, and he turned to face those that had summoned him. To reach them, Norgarth would have to walk the path of champions. 15 statues flanking the central walkway of the throne room that led to the monarch's black crystal chair. 15 champions of his clan, staring with disapproval of him with every pace closer to the dais. So deep underground the exquisite chamber was lit by braziers of magical flame in the statues' hands or wreathing their weapons in fire. Their flickering caused the shadows to dance over the silent guardians' faces, twisting them into jeering grimaces. They stared down, passing judgment on Norgarth. He advanced, trying to disguise his staggers as best he could. He gripped his cup a little tighter, as if it would somehow steady him, and gazed around him in the hope that it would give reason to his inability to walk in a straight line. He ignored the entourage of spineless, snivelling advisors. All except his sister. What the fuck is she doing here? Rage flashed through him. Norgarth wobbled to a knee, cup still in hand. You sent for me, Your Highness? I summoned you over an hour ago. I am your father, and you have no need to use the title with me, Norgarth. His voice was calm but harsh, as it always was. His eyes pierced through Norgarth as he sat in the elaborate leather armour, patterned with dwarven runes and crossed warhammers over his chest. The only sound in the silence that followed was a slight creaking from the king's toughened armour as he shifted position on the throne. I needed to appear before you suitably attired, my liege. Norgarth slurred slightly, ignoring the request as he rose to his feet. The fighter brushed some dirt from his knees and adjusted his surcoat, emblazoned with their clan crest, in a vain attempt to appear as though he had gone to some effort. It appears as though you needed the time to find someone to dress you in the state you are in. The comment caused a guffaw from one of the onlookers, who did a poor job of stifling it. Norgarth shot an angry look around them, but he was in no state to pick out who it was. Whether the king missed it or ignored it wasn't clear. He was so focused on Norgarth, it was as if they were the only two in the room. Norgarth let the comment pass unanswered. Where were you? His father asked, sitting up straight for the first time. I was in my chambers, Your Grace. I arrived in the nighttime last night, and I didn't feel it were prudent to. Norgarth began to explain, fighting to throw together a sentence. No. Where were you? Interrupted the king, eyes locked on Norgarth, his jaw pulsing where he was clenching his teeth in an attempt to not let his anger show. That would not be kingly. Norgarth took a swig from his cup to stall his answer. His head was fuzzy. Shit, he knows. How can he possibly know? Sire, I don't understand what you mean exactly, he replied, trying to delay further thinking time. His ale-soaked brain wasn't complying with his need. Relthor sent a rider who arrived in the night, shortly after Moon's Crest. Dropping his gaze to the flagstones for an answer, anger flared in him further. That fucking scrotum wart, the summoned prince whispered, not nearly quietly enough. You will keep a civil tongue in my halls, if you wish to keep it at all. The king did not shout, but he raised his voice loudly enough to give Norgarth pause. I was woken for the rider, who brought news of the battle that should have been delivered to me by my son, who apparently felt whoring his evening away was more important than paying his king and father homage. I ask again, for the final time, where were you? Norgarth raised his head to his father, straightened himself, and thought speaking confidently and with design may deceive his inquisitor over the truth. The battle was won. I don't see why it matters where I was. The king cut him off again. It matters. I commanded you to be there. You disobeyed me. I committed my forces. I felt my presence was not necessary. Norgarth fumbled. You feel you can overrule my command? Are you king? With that, the king rose to his feet, and the questions were left unanswered. This is the last time you disappoint me and bring shame to our clan. Shame? You have a great victory. Our clan is showered in glory. I did not need to be there. That is not the point. Relthor did bring glory to us, but you were ordered to be there alongside him. The iron anvils were there. Your absence was noted. Why do you continually disobey me? The words came out of Norgarth with such distaste they were almost a growl. You had Relthor. He is the favoured son. He is your commander. You don't need me. There is no favoured son. He just behaves as a prince should behave. You are twice the fighter Relthor is, but he is organised, loyal, and a master tactician. If you would just learn from your brother, you could be the mightiest warrior our clan has ever known. Your visage could stand in these very halls, stated the king, raising his arms to encompass the rows of silent sentinels, looking down on them from stony heights. I'm sure Reltha will look heroic, stood amongst these relics. With that, the king turned his back on his shamed son. You disgrace yourself and this entire clan, he scolded, walking around his seat and placing his hand on one of the obsidian axes that made the crest of the throne back. In that instant, for the briefest of moments, steadying himself against his seat of power, his father looked old, tired. Then he straightened and it was gone. A moment of silence passed. Where were you? The king almost whispered. Norgarth still at his back. Another swig. The prince stared into the cup. Were his hands shaking? It really is of no consequence. I will decide what is of consequence. The icy voice cut through the weakening resolve of the shamed warrior. Quietening his voice for the first time, Norgarth pleaded, Sire, if I might speak with you alone, I'm sure you will. Where were you? The king roared, rounding on the subject of his annoyance. Norgarth's grip tightened on his drinking vessel. His eyes pleaded with his father. Answer me, Norgarth. This time this is a command you will not disobey. His voice and glare were filled with frost. I was at the mine. Again, his father turned his back on him. He took a few steps towards the dais. I know you don't believe me, but I can prove. For the first time, another voice could be heard in the throne room. Oh, Norgarth, his sister called out in pained disapproval. Quiet, snapped their father, eyes still fixed on his son. Silence echoed through the great hall. No one dared even move in case it caused a sound. Your insistence on pushing that shaft is approaching insanity. I forbade you from returning there. Another defiance, another betrayal. There is no betrayal, father, Norgarth replied, meeting his father's stare with a pained expression on his brow. Preposterous! I have requested and then ordered you to stay away from there. Your liege lord, your sovereign, the just and rightful ruler of our people, but more importantly, as your loving father. You ignored that and did as you always do. You thought about yourself and you did what you believed was best for you. That is absolutely a betrayal. The king moved a step or two lower from the throne's platform as he said this. Then he stopped and his face seemed to soften slightly for a moment. The betrayal hurts, but the fact that you don't even see the betrayal cuts me deeply as your king and father. Father, I am certain that this will be our richest mine yet, the richest mine our clan has ever found. I have proof that, proof, more proof. He almost spat the word at Norgarth. The number of times you have stood before me and promised me proof. Our greatest prospectors have all said that there is nothing there and to pursue it further is folly. You are still drunk on your discovery of the Valor mine. That find brought untold wealth to this clan. We all praise you for that, but that was 10 years ago now, and you have found nothing more. The ruler climbed the steps he had just descended and returned to his previous position next to his throne, and his demeanor changed completely, back to the father he once knew before the crown sat on his head. But Norgarth, you don't need to find anything more. The Valor mine alone could sustain our people, not counting our others. You do not need to prove yourself further in that vein. Your need to find more is turning into desperation. You must stop before you embarrass yourself further. Embarrass myself? You are more concerned about any embarrassment that may fall on you. The accusation stung the monarch deeply, and the fact that it was most likely to be true. His voice turned cold. There is only so much protection I can give you, and now that you have deserted during battle, there is not much more I can do. You are hereby forbidden to engage in any dealings with this fool's mine, which I hereby name it. If I can just show you this, Norgarth pleaded, fumbling in his pouch for something. He withdrew an object that was the size of a large apple and wrapped in a tarnished swathe of antelope leather. He started walking up to the dais, holding it out in front of him, towards his father. You will understand why. Enough! The dwarven ruler roared, shaking the very walls of the chamber. It was enough to give Norgarth pause, and he clutched his bundle to him as he staggered to a halt at the foot of the stairs. Do not press me, Norgarth, for once I make a decree, it cannot be undone. You know this. Accept that you are done. The mine is done. You are not to speak of it again. You are not to think of it, contemplate it, scheme with it in mind, and you will never, ever return there. That is my final word. For the first time, Norgarth's demeanour changed too. He sobered slightly, and a steely determination filled his stature and expression. I'm going straight back there. Norgarth, please. Another appeal from his sister rang out, but again was ignored. You will do no such thing. You will return to your quarters directly, where you will stay until I think of a suitable punishment for your disgraces. Enough of this. You must listen to me. My feelings about this mine were correct all along. Your arrogance is clouding your senses. Trust me, if you ignore my words, it will be the most idiotic decision you have ever made as our king. As soon as the words left his lips, he knew the insult was too much. The ruler sat in his throne as the ruler sat in his throne as a symbol of detaching himself from being a father to make the decree. You are hereby banished from our clan. Once you have gathered your things, you will leave our lands immediately, and you will never step foot in our kingdom. To do so will mean sentence of death. Zartoth, remove my son. The king stood, without looking at the exile, and walked from the throne room through his private audience chamber behind the throne. Zartoth appeared beside Norgarth, this time battle-axe in hand, with 3 other armed guards. Norgarth quietly and calmly bent down to place his bundle on the lowest step of the dais. His hand lingered on it for a moment or two, in disbelief that this was the result of this encounter. He righted himself, glanced at his sister briefly, who wiped a tear from her cheek, turned and hurled his flagon, still half full of ale, at the nearest statue. By the time the shattered pieces hit the floor, Norgarth was halfway down the approach, flanked by his wary escort. As he turned to leave the throne room, he looked back at the dais, where he removed his hand. When he removed his hand from the wad of leather, a corner had unfolded, and even from here he could see how in the torchlight made the contents sparkle and shine. And that's the end.